This is the world of the ink-obsessed. These are not adventurers, generals, or pirates. These are the paper pushers of empires, the men who made colonial conquest legible, one ink-stained page at a time. And you, lucky you, have just been appointed as one of them. You probably won't survive this, not because of disease or cannon fire, but because of the bureaucracy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, let me know your city and local time in the comments. You take your seat at a desk that has seen better decades. The surface is uneven from generations of elbows, ink pots, and improperly used paperweights. Everything smells vaguely of old vinegar and iron, exactly what ink was made of. The drawer sticks slightly as you pull it open. Inside are 3 quills, 1 blotting cloth, and a wrinkled sheet of foolscap with an angry-looking ink recipe scrawled on it like a curse. You'll learn it by heart soon enough. The office itself is more of a room than an institution. Just 6 desks, a few dusty cabinets, and the governor's portrait above the fireplace, glaring at you as if you owe him something. Maybe you do. A sleepy breeze filters through slatted windows, disturbing a stack of census forms, which immediately flutter to the floor like surrendering doves. No one moves to pick them up. Everyone else is hunched over their work, methodically dipping, scribbling, and blotting with a rhythm that's almost meditative. One of the older clerks, let's call him Perkins, clears his throat and gestures at your blank page with a knowing sigh. You'd best get started, son. Ink dries, eventually. You do as you're told. Dip the quill, drag the tip gently across the parchment, and feel that telltale pull. The slight resistance of the page against the wet metal nib. It's oddly satisfying, and also terrifying. Because if you smudge this, if you over-ink, if you drip even one bloated drop onto this legal copy of shipment, going on to 0821, you'll have to rewrite the whole thing. From scratch. Perkins leans over and whispers, "This place has 2 gods, paper and ink. And only one of them stains your shirt forever." He's not kidding. The ink used here isn't just any black goop. It's an iron gall mix, prone to corrosion and ink burn. Leave it in your pen too long, and it eats through the nib. Spill it on your pants? They're done. And woe unto the fool who uses too little gum Arabic. His letters will fade before they reach the coast. You'll get used to the process. Fill the pot each morning. Stir the sediment, test the color on a scrap, and always, always clean the quill before lunch. One unfortunate clerk in Barbados forgot and ended up with a quill that fused to the ink pot. Outside, you hear a donkey bray. Someone is delivering more paper, or sugar, or maybe the governor's weekly summary of weather complaints. Inside, the only sounds are the rustle of parchment, the occasional drip from the ceiling, and the ever-present scratch of ink against page. There's a quiet dignity to it. You are not a soldier or a traitor, but you are the reason the Empire knows how many chickens were raised in Ceylon last month. You are the bridge between utter chaos and the illusion of record-keeping. You are ink incarnate. And as the sun begins to lower behind a haze of dust and ocean salt, you notice your fingers are already stained blue-black. The blotting paper curls from overuse. Your back aches. And your first letter, just 5 lines, is complete. 1 page down, thousands to go. Perkins shuffles past, hands behind his back, and gives a small nod. That's a good R you've got there, solid loop. It's the highest praise you'll get this week. The sun is barely up, and you're already at your desk, sleeves rolled back, quill ready, eyes half shut. There is no rush here, only the creeping crawl of official time, which seems to obey no known calendar. The morning heat hasn't set in yet, so for now, the wooden chair is only mildly uncomfortable. By mid-morning, it will feel like punishment. Your day begins, as always, with a ritual. First, check the ink. If the top has thickened overnight, you'll need to stir it. Not too vigorously, just a gentle swirl with the tip of your quill. Too much motion, and the pigment separates. Too little, and you end up with a watery gray streak that makes your superior think you've gone soft in the head. Next, sharpen the quill. This isn't like whittling a stick. This is delicate, finicky surgery using a tiny penknife and an enormous amount of self-doubt. The nib must be sharp enough to cut hair, split enough to carry ink, but not so wide it blots. It's your primary tool, and it hates you. Once everything is ready, you begin with the ledger, a long, narrow book designed to hurt both the eyes and the soul. Grain shipments, rum tallies, tax records from 3 provinces ago. You copy columns with robotic patience. Weight, date, origin, destination, and whether or not the crate in question contained suspicious beetles. At some point in the morning, a breeze might visit your desk like a bored cat, flipping a page, offering momentary mercy. Occasionally, a parrot shrieks outside. That's the most excitement you'll get today. And yet, this is where you live now. Not just the office, but this rhythm. It is the rhythm of dipping, scratching, blotting. A gentle, almost musical pattern that fills your hours and empties your mind. You forget about the sea. You forget about the calendar. You begin to mark time by the smell of your ink drying. You've got a fellow clerk across from you, Rosenthal, wears spectacles so thick they distort time. He hums while he writes, and he's currently logging an entire shipment of pickled onions with a kind of reverence usually reserved for poetry. You try not to compare your handwriting to his, but it's hard not to notice how each of his letters seems to sit more confidently on the page. Yours still lean, unsure of their place. Rosenthal clears his throat. If your G descends too far, it'll smudge on the next line. You adjust your hand posture, nod like you've just received a sacred teaching. By noon, the heat begins to creep in. Ink starts to dry before it hits the page. You'll have to thin it slightly with water, just a few drops. But don't get cocky. Too much, and your black turns to bruise purple, which the overseer detests. Only thieves and liars write in purple, he once muttered, after throwing a ledger into the sea. You stop for lunch, not because you're hungry, but because the paper is now damp with your elbow sweat. Lunch is a wedge of cold yam wrapped in last week's shipping manifest. You eat it slowly, staring at the ink stains on your fingertips. Rosenthal, still chewing, says, "Did I ever tell you about the man who fell asleep mid-paragraph and woke up with a full page of Z's?" You chuckle, lightly, carefully. Too much laughter, and you'll get ink in your teeth again. The day continues. Your fingers begin to ache. You shift in your chair, trying to avoid the spot where a nail sticks up. You copy numbers, names, weights, comments like shipment partly spoiled due to rats, and the very occasional note like excellent rum, commend sender. There's no punctuation beyond what's absolutely necessary. No one here believes in semicolons. And then, at last, comes the last form of the afternoon, a letter to the mainland, dictated earlier by the governor's assistant, and now to be rendered in your neatest, driest, most legible hand. You dip the quill, take a breath, and begin to write. To His Majesty's Minister of Colonial Affairs, regarding the matter of import permits and river traffic congestion. Each line is an exercise in posture, patience, and paper preservation. You end the letter just as the sun begins to slide behind a wall of overgrown palms. The candle gets lit. Your eyes sting. Perkins passes your desk and mutters, "Still haven't fixed that W. Looks like a spider fell in your ink." You nod. "You'll fix it. Tomorrow." By the end of the day, your notebook is heavier, your wrists sore, your neck a bit crooked from leaning too far toward your page. But you've survived another shift in the slow-moving, ink-soaked heart of empire. You cap your ink bottle, stretch your back, and sigh. Then remember, the next day, it starts all over again. It's your third week now in the colonial office, and you've come to a surprising realization. Ink isn't just a tool here. It's practically a currency, a symbol, a quiet obsession. It's not uncommon to hear clerks compare shades of black the way others compare wine vintages. You've heard phrases like, "A good iron gall keeps its dignity," and "That's the kind of ink you write treaties with." No one's quite sure when it started, this reverence. But here, in this humid paper jungle, the right ink means authority, permanence, respect. And the wrong ink? Well, let's just say a poorly inked report once got a man demoted to counting barrels in the harbor. For a year. Why did ink matter so much? Because in the colonies, everything was about distance. Distance from power, from Europe, from libraries and ink makers and well-supplied stationers. So if you were going to send a document on a 6-week voyage across the Atlantic, it had better not fade, smear, or look amateur. That ink had to arrive intact, as sharp as the day it left your desk. There was also hierarchy involved. Senior clerks had better ink, darker, thicker, richer in tone. It was a quiet kind of status symbol, like having a good chair or being allowed to use Latin abbreviations. And let's not forget durability. You'd seen letters from 5 years ago where the text had nearly vanished into the paper like a whispered secret. The good stuff, real iron gall, aged into an almost metallic script, a bold declaration that said, "I was written by someone who knew how to boil oak galls and wasn't afraid to use wine vinegar." Of course, the downside of iron gall was that it could eat through paper if the recipe was too strong. And the recipe? Oh, there were so many. Ask 5 clerks how to make proper ink, and you'd get 6 conflicting answers. Some swore by a mix of oak galls, iron sulfate, and rainwater aged in ceramic pots. Others insisted on rusty nails soaked in white wine. One clerk, slightly mad from years of paperwork, used pomegranate skins and goat urine. Historians still argue whether this particular concoction ever dried properly. You keep a small notebook of ink recipes now, half as a reference, half as a running joke. There's something deeply comforting about writing, boil galls until mushy, strain through muslin, add ferrous bits, whisper prayer. In this world, recipes were sacred. Passed down, tweaked, hoarded like family heirlooms. You once saw Perkins panic when a mold began growing inside his ink bottle. He whispered, "Not again," as if remembering a trauma too deep to share. There's also the matter of weather. Ink behaves differently in different seasons. Too dry and it flakes. Too damp and it bleeds like gossip. The trick is balance and a readiness to adapt. You've begun watching clouds not for rain, but for humidity levels. You now gauge storms not by thunder, but by how long the ink takes to dry on the corner of a folded report. You've also learned to recognize the smell. Fresh ink is sharp, tangy, slightly acidic. Aged ink turns earthy, musky, less aggressive, more wise. You sometimes catch Rosenthal sniffing the tips of his quills like a sommelier. Then there are the disasters. Ink pots spilling on maps, smeared signatures, letters where the ink pooled into a single blot that looks vaguely like a sea monster. You once watched a junior clerk lean too hard on a blotter and leave a perfect forehead print on a customs list. That list was quietly buried in the archive and never spoken of again. Sometimes, in the middle of a slow afternoon, you wonder how this obsession started. Was it a royal decree, a matter of pride, or just the slow evolution of bored men trapped in warm rooms with nothing but paper to talk to? Historians still argue whether the colonial ink fixation was functional or cultural. Some say it was driven by fear of errors, of being forgotten, of letting a page go pale. Others say it was just what happened when a job became your whole world, and ink was the only thing you could control. But for you, it's simpler. You dip the quill, you write the line, you pause. And when the ink dries just right, when the shade is dark, the flow smooth, the smell faintly metallic, you feel something close to peace. It's not power, it's not glory, but it's yours. You no longer flinch when someone hands you a vial of something vaguely brown and says, "Give this a try. Fresh batch." That's just how new ink recipes arrive. Informal, mysterious, always slightly suspicious, and usually stored in recycled bottles that used to hold medicine or, disturbingly, pickled vegetables. Today, Rosenthal's the one experimenting. He's seated near the open window, sleeves rolled to the elbows, carefully pouring a syrupy black liquid through a folded scrap of muslin. "I added a pinch of copper sulfate this time," he explains casually, as though he isn't conducting mild chemical warfare in a sunlit office. You nod solemnly, not wanting to discourage him. But you know what copper sulfate does. It stains everything green-blue and makes the ink burn faintly if you get it in a paper cut. You learned that lesson 3 weeks ago. Twice. The recipes themselves are almost magical in their variety. They include instructions like boil until it smells right, or add 1 snail if available. One of the most popular among the older clerks involves rainwater gathered on a Tuesday, filtered through ash, and mixed with vinegar and gum arabic in proportions only remembered in rhymes. You're beginning to see the charm. These aren't just fluids, they're rituals. Some clerks won't write a word until their ink has rested overnight. Others won't stir counterclockwise for fear it breaks the recipe. Superstition blends with science here. A world where ink is judged by how it feels sliding off the quill, how it sits on parchment, and whether or not it holds its mood by moonlight. Perkins swears he can smell a bad batch from across the room. If it smells like a wet roof, it'll fade before the courier even boards the ship, he claims. And then there's the dreaded sour ink, batches that turn, ferment, and bubble ever so slightly. The bottle hisses when you open it. You don't ask questions. You bury it in the courtyard. Today's batch from Rosenthal is vivid. The copper lends it a strange sheen, like beetle wings. You try writing with it. Just 1 word. Inventory. It looks sharp, but dries crusty. A failure. You nod to Rosenthal, who shrugs and begins a new mix. That's how it goes. Most of the time, your ink is iron gall, the old reliable, made from oak galls, those odd little lumps found on trees, caused by parasitic wasps. Turns out colonial bureaucracies owe a lot to irritated oak branches. The galls are dried, crushed, and steeped in wine or water. Then you add iron sulfate, sometimes pulled from nails soaked in vinegar, and the mixture turns a deep, angry black. Finally, a dash of gum arabic keeps it from running. The recipe was simple in theory, but temperamental in practice. Too much iron, and the ink eats the paper like acid. Too little, and it turns watery gray. Not enough gum, and it feathers into the page like a bleeding wound. One infamous clerk once tried to add soot for darkness. The soot clumped, clogged the quills, and smeared like morning grease. Another used onion skins, hoping for a sepia tone. He was laughed out of the office for writing a shipment manifest that smelled like soup, but the real danger was rot. Ink is alive, in a way. If improperly stored, it goes bad. Smells like spoiled meat. Grows things. You've seen Perkins sniff a bottle and say, "This one's turned philosophical," before chucking it out the window. There's a legend about a particularly powerful ink made in Antigua, dark as midnight and smooth as silk, supposedly used to sign peace treaties and death warrants. No one knows the exact recipe, though. One man claimed it involved bat droppings. Another said it required a full moon and crushed elderberries. You suspect both were lying. Or dreaming. Historians still argue whether these colonial recipes were practical chemistry or just elaborate rituals to make clerks feel important. After all, who else gets to brew potions on the job? But the real value of ink wasn't just technical, it was emotional. In a world where the colonial machine moved slowly and impersonally, ink was one of the few things you could make yourself. Tailor to your own quirks. Defend as your mix. It was identity in a bottle. You look at the streaks on your fingers. Today's batch left a faint reddish tint. Rosenthal says it's the copper, but you suspect it's just another mystery. One more layer in the endlessly tedious and somehow fascinating world of ink. You close your notebook of recipes, tuck the quill back into its worn groove, and lean back in your chair, listening to the slow creak of wood and the distant flutter of palm leaves. Another day, another experiment, another page, black and slightly sticky with authority. There is a moment, just after lunch, when everything in the colonial office slows to an almost meditative crawl. The sun hits the shutters just right, casting stripes of light across your desk like a tired zebra. The heat settles in your bones. Even the flies seem sluggish. And it's during this lull that the ink arguments usually begin. Today's debate, black versus blue. It starts with Rosenthal, naturally. He's holding up a page of correspondence he just finished, admiring the hue like he's inspecting a fine silk. You see this? Indigo ink. Imported. None of that rusty gall nonsense. Blue is civilized. Perkins scoffs from the far desk, not even looking up. Blue's for sailors and schoolboys. It lacks conviction. You already know this will spiral. I'll have you know, Rosenthal says, pushing up his spectacles. Blue ink was used in civil service postings across the Indies. It's cooler in tone and resists yellowing. The Dutch adore it. Because they write on tulips, mutters Perkins. Black is final. It says, this matter is settled. Blue is pending. You watch this with quiet amusement, lazily dipping your quill in your own ink pot. An undecided grayish black today. The result of over-thinned gall and too much gum. It doesn't make a statement. It asks a question. But this debate is older than your posting. Colors in ink weren't just aesthetic, they were symbolic and controversial. In some colonies, clerks weren't allowed to use anything but black. Official documents had to stand up to travel, humidity, and scrutiny. Black was serious. It was weighty. And crucially, it was visible on faded parchment even after weeks at sea. But blue was aspirational. Imported, often made with indigo or synthetic dyes. Smoother, more modern. It didn't cling to paper as hard as iron gall, but it flowed better, and some claimed it was easier on the eyes. The French naturally embraced it. Their bureaucrats wrote letters in powdery blue ink that smelled faintly of lavender. Some even sealed them with matching wax. The Portuguese used purple on occasion, though that was frowned upon unless you were high-ranking or slightly eccentric. Red ink was a different matter entirely. Forbidden for most. Reserved for corrections, for condemnations, and occasionally for priests who wanted to show divine authority in the margins. You once heard a tale of a clerk who signed his name in red and was reassigned to an inland post surrounded by mosquitoes and regret. Historians still argue whether these color codes were standardized or just evolved through endless bickering and spilled ink. Some say it was cultural, colors reflecting national temperaments. Others argue it was all about legibility and permanence. Of course, there were always rebels. There was that one Spanish clerk in Havana who used green ink. Every document, every note, claimed it matched the sea. His reports were so pretty, no one questioned the numbers. Until they did. And then he disappeared. And then there's Rosenthal, who once tried purple with gold flecks. Experimental, he said. Evocative. It smeared across an entire register and looked like a monarch had sneezed. The overseer didn't speak to him for a week. Your own preference is undecided. You like the look of blue, but trust the grip of black. You've started blending batches, blue with a dash of gall ink. The result is moody, unreliable. You call it storm dusk, and only use it on copies no one will ever read. Still, you can't deny the emotional pull of ink color. It's strange. You'd think clerks would be above this, focused on function, on efficiency. But no. You hear it in their whispers. That ink's too cheerful. This one's sulky. That one smells like betrayal. It's art, in the slowest, driest, most administrative sense of the word. Perkins is now demonstrating how his black ink doesn't smudge even after 5 seconds. He's counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He drags a finger across the page. Clean. Rosenthal rolls his eyes. You sigh, gently. Somewhere outside, a mango falls with a heavy thud. A lizard darts across the window ledge. And inside, the war of colors continues. Soft-spoken, passive-aggressive, and entirely unnecessary. But you understand it now. In a world where you spend 9 hours a day writing other people's words, stamping other people's orders, and signing off on other people's mistakes, choosing your own ink color is the only form of self-expression left. And if it must be blue or black or storm dusk, then so be it. Just so long as it dries before the overseer sees it. By now you've learned that not all ink is created equal, but more alarmingly, not all ink is safe. There's a reason every clerk has stained fingertips, occasional rashes, and a wary look when someone says, "Try this, it's homemade." The truth is, many colonial ink recipes flirted with chemical disaster. And you, my friend, are now waist-deep in the danger zone. Today, it's the infamous iron gall recipe number 9, which Perkins calls the Widowmaker, with a fond chuckle. He swears it yields the richest black of any blend on the island. Dark as a tax collector's soul, he says. But he also warns you not to leave it uncapped, or near copper, or in direct sunlight, or, ideally, near anything flammable. You follow the steps anyway. Boil crushed oak galls until the liquid smells medicinal, but not angry. Then strain it through 3 layers of cloth. Add iron sulfate, just a dash, until the color shifts from tea to tar. Then gum arabic to give it cling. Finally, a drop of clove oil, which allegedly keeps the rot away. Allegedly. You bottle it. Label it with your initials. And pray. Moments later, a sharp hiss. The cork pops out like it's been cursed. A thin black stream bubbles up, then settles again. Rosenthal raises an eyebrow. Still alive, are we? You are. Barely. But your desk now has a ring on it that may never leave. The thing is, colonial ink making wasn't chemistry in the modern sense. It was alchemy by guesswork. Most of the ingredients were either unstable, mildly poisonous, or both. Iron sulfate could corrode your blade, your quill, or your lunchbox. Vinegar fumes gave more than one clerk nosebleeds. And gum arabic, though fairly harmless, attracted ants like a royal decree. Then there were the stranger ingredients. Soot, for example. Used to create lamp-black ink, thick and oily. You could collect it by holding a metal plate over a candle, scraping the residue, and mixing it with honey water. But get the ratios wrong, and the ink never dries. Rosenthal once made a batch that smudged a week later. He still denies it. One legendary clerk tried squid ink, claimed it was authentic, wrote a full naval log with it. By the time it reached the mainland, the letters had faded into indecipherable shadows. That man now counts crates, Another popular additive was beer, not for flavor, but for consistency. Ale kept the ink flowing on damp days, allegedly. The downside? The ink spoiled if left uncovered, attracting flies, fungal growth, and at least one tipsy cat. Historians still argue whether these danger inks were worth the trouble. Some say the extreme recipes were status symbols, proof that the clerk had the time, ingredients, and gall, literally, to risk it. Others suggest it was simply a lack of options. Colonial outposts didn't always have access to proper ink from Europe. You made do. Or you made something worse. Even so, there were warnings passed between generations. Never mix vinegar with powdered charcoal near an open flame. Don't store your ink next to peppercorns. It absorbs the scent. Always wash your hands before touching your eyes, especially if you used blue vitriol. You've made your peace with the risks. It's part of the job. You now keep a cloth nearby, just in case. You wear your oldest shirt on experiment days, and you've stopped licking your fingers to turn pages, an early habit beaten out of you by one unfortunate interaction with turmeric-based dye. Still, there's something thrilling about it all. You're not just writing, you're crafting, brewing, risking life and parchment for a shade that no one else has quite managed. And when you write your first full document with your homemade Widowmaker batch, it does look good. Dark, elegant, slightly ominous, just like you hoped, until it eats through the paper. A slow brown halo appears around each word. The acidity is too high. Within hours, your beautiful prose looks like it was written on burnt toast. You sigh, rip the page out, and start again with Rosenthal's dull but reliable Ink No. 4, which smells like old cabbage but behaves perfectly. And so the lesson sinks in. Ink, like people, can be brilliant but unstable, beautiful but short-lived. And sometimes it's better to choose the boring one that doesn't destroy everything it touches. Still, you save the Widowmaker recipe in your notebook, just in case. You're barely seated when the day's supplies arrive. A battered box of fresh quills, one cracked pot of wax, and most importantly, sand. Yes, sand. The most underestimated player in this entire operation. While modern folks might reach for a tissue or wait for ink to dry, luxuries. Here in the Colonial Office, you rely on finely sifted sand to keep your writing from becoming a smeared catastrophe. It's part of the daily rhythm now. Dip, write, sprinkle, tap. The sand lives in a small shaker made of tin with holes punched in the top and a cork stopper to keep humidity out. Rosenthal calls it his paper seasoning. You pretend not to laugh because laughter leads to coughing, and coughing while holding an open ink bottle is a deadly gamble. Sprinkling the sand is an art form. Too much, and the page looks like a beach. Too little, and your signature leaves a ghostly trail when folded. You've seen a clerk get reprimanded for reckless blotting, a phrase that's somehow both hilarious and haunting. Then there's the wax, used for seals, signatures, and proof of officialdom. It smells faintly of beeswax and colonial self-importance. You soften it over a candle stub, press the governor's seal into it with a heavy brass stamp, and try not to burn yourself. Again, the wax, when properly applied, is satisfying. It gives weight to a letter, a kind of ceremonial, and now this is serious. You've come to enjoy the little plume of smoke that curls up as it melts. Rosenthal likes to carve tiny faces in his unused wax blobs, which he keeps in a row on the corner of his desk, like waxy little sentinels. Then there's your quill, still the most fickle tool in your kit. It needs trimming daily, sharpening hourly, and threatens betrayal every time your hand cramps. Made from goose feathers mostly, occasionally swan if the shipment's fancy. You're learning to cut the nib yourself, using the same dull penknife passed down like a cursed heirloom. The angle must be precise, the slit just so, Too wide, and the ink flows like a flood. Too narrow, and nothing comes out but resentment. You've tried reed pens too, sturdier, less romantic, but the quill remains supreme. Soft, slightly springy, elegant. It dances on the page when treated right. It drags and stabs when tired or mishandled. Kind of like you. Your desk is now a landscape of tools. Ink to your left. Sand in the center. Quills in a row. One stained slightly red from a previous ink experiment gone sideways. Blotting cloth, now a patchwork of your worst mistakes. And off to the side, a small, deliberate stack of test pages where you warm up your letters before committing to the real parchment. Clerks talk about paper, like sailors talk about wind. Some pages are too slick, others too absorbent. The best is slightly textured, enough tooth to catch the ink, but not so much it frays the nib. Perkins refers to one particular brand as heavenly grit. You believe he's only half joking. Historians still argue whether sand blotting was more effective than absorbent paper or merely a colonial compromise. One theory claims the use of sand persisted simply because it felt official, performative almost. That little pause as the grains hit the ink and whispered, "This was important," but you know better. You've seen the chaos caused by impatience. One hasty fold, one poorly blotted name, and a shipment of spices goes to the wrong coast. The office once spent an entire day tracing a misplaced comma that sent rum to the wrong hemisphere. This is why the pace is slow, intentionally, methodically, because there is power in the pause. Power in letting the ink dry under a dusting of sand. You're not just writing, you're preparing the record for eternity. Even the act of folding the paper becomes sacred. It must be done only after the sand is tapped off gently, like brushing flour from a loaf of bread. The folds themselves are crisp, geometrical. Rosenthal once made an origami-style closure for a love letter. He's still blushing about it. Every element has a place in this ritual. Quill, sand, wax, paper, ink. Even the wax seal, pressed firmly at the end, holds a moment of finality. You exhale as you stamp it. Done. You sit back, fingers dusted with black, a single grain of sand still lodged under your nail. Another page, another small act of bureaucracy complete. The room is quiet, save for the shuffle of pages and the occasional hiss of wax. This is the daily dance, repeated endlessly. And somehow, each day, it feels just new enough to matter. There's a myth that official documents are clean, orderly, and dignified, that each page is a crisp, pristine representation of calm authority. But if you've spent more than 5 minutes in a colonial clerk's notebook, you know better. Your own notebook, for example, is not so much a ledger as it is a battlefield, one where letters have fallen, ink has exploded, and order was soundly defeated by exhaustion. You flip through it now, eyes scanning past crooked lines, ink blots, accidental ink tests in the margins, and that one entire page you wrote sideways without noticing until it was too late. There's a half-finished sketch of a mango with legs on page 42. You have no memory of drawing it, and yet this is normal. Every clerk has one. That other notebook, the unofficial one, the one where math gets done in shaky columns, where doodles of ships and monkeys appear next to inventory counts, and where angry mutterings about barrel Natter 15 still missing are jotted with passive-aggressive fury. Rosenthal's notebook is legendary. Half poetry, half passive-aggressive reports. One page simply says, "Ship captain very rude, would not share biscuits." Another contains an elaborate cartoon of Perkins asleep at his desk, surrounded by snoring speech bubbles filled with Latin. Perkins, of course, denies it's him, but he did chuckle. You've started using a different ink in your chaos book, as Rosenthal calls it. Something light, less serious, almost sepia. It feels less intimidating, more forgiving. Mistakes don't shout. They whisper. Besides, your official quill is too fine for this paper. You use an old one, splayed at the tip like a tired broom. There's something oddly freeing about it. The lack of pressure. No seals, no supervisors breathing down your neck, no concern for margins. Just you, the ink, and the indulgence of imperfection. That said, this freedom can lead to strange results. You once spent half an hour trying to calculate shipment taxes and ended up drawing a grid of increasingly upset chickens. Another time, you copied a recipe for pumpkin curry between two lists of iron tools. You now associate nutmeg with freight weights. But there's a reason this clutter exists, this mess. It's where the real thinking happens, where mistakes are made before they become official, where thoughts are tested like ink on scrap. Some clerks go further. One used to track weather patterns in the corners of his pages, convinced it affected ink flow. Another kept lists of suspicious cargo with notes like, claimed to be jam, smelled like rum, definitely not jam. No one questioned him. Too tired. Historians still argue whether these notebooks had real archival value or were merely clerical coping mechanisms. But more and more, scholars are beginning to cite them in studies of daily colonial life. The doodles, the asides, the jokes, all little fingerprints of the human hand beneath the empire's endless paperwork. Even now, as you write in your chaos book, you hear the gentle chorus of scribbles around the room. Sand taps, wax pops, the scratching of quills, and somewhere the soft thud of a frustrated forehead meeting the desk. You glance at your own page again. Somehow, during an attempt to record tin barrel counts, you've drawn what appears to be a flamingo holding a ledger. You decide not to question it. It has a hat, after all. That makes it official. Then, from across the room, Rosenthal lifts his head and asks, "Have you ever noticed we write better when no one's watching?" You have. Absolutely. Without the pressure of finality, your handwriting is looser, more natural. The ink flows better. The quill glides instead of hesitating. It's like your hand breathes easier. You jot that down. Write better when not being watched, and circle it twice. This is what the notebook is for. Not just mistakes, but memory, humor, the pieces of yourself you leave behind in a world of documentation that is not yours. And maybe, someday, when this office is long gone and these books are dusty relics in a quiet archive, some historian will find your notes and laugh at the flamingo, or admire the margin quote about dried mango prices. Maybe they'll even wonder what it was like to be here, in this room, hunched over this page, during the long, slow afternoon of ink and heat and silence. They'll never know. But you do. You close the notebook gently, sand still caught in the spine, and return to your official work. The ink is waiting. The real page is clean. For now, your wrist hurts. It's a dull, throbbing ache. Part tension, part repetition, part existential dread. You've tried stretching. You've tried holding the quill differently. You've even tried pretending the pain isn't there, which worked for about 4 minutes until your hand seized up mid-shipment, and you turned the word into something that looked like shigment. Welcome to the secret plague of colonial clerks, hand fatigue. No one talks about it openly. It's considered impolite, weak, or worse, unclerical. But behind the stony faces and blot-streaked sleeves, every man in this office is nursing an ache somewhere. Shoulder, elbow, wrist, neck. This job is a full-body workout in slow motion. And the culprit? Endless copy work. Today, you're transcribing logs from a merchant vessel called the Prudent Gull. You'd think it carried silk or tea or something dignified. Nope. Salted mackerel. And lots of it. The original is barely legible, probably written during a storm by someone who had never met a full sentence. You're expected to make it beautiful. Or at least legible. Dip, write, blot, Stretch. Repeat. Rosenthal has developed a system. 20 lines. Then flex the fingers. Shake the hand. Crack the knuckles. Quietly, or Perkins complains. And then sip tepid water from a chipped cup that smells faintly of cardamom. Keeps the ink hand loose, he says. You tried that yesterday. It helped. Slightly. Perkins, on the other hand, claims never to suffer. You write from the shoulder, not the wrist, he mutters. Flick from the elbow. Don't cradle it like a bird. Easy for him to say. He's been writing the same 5 phrases for 20 years and could probably script, by His Majesty's order, in his sleep. But you're still learning the curves and flourishes, still figuring out how much pressure makes the letters clean and how much tears the parchment. It's not just about muscle, it's muscle memory. And then there's the ink. Today's batch is thicker than usual, slightly gummy. Every downstroke catches just a little. You adjust your hand again. Shift the page. Blame the humidity. Anything but admit you're struggling. You glance around the room. No one's speaking. Just the symphony of discomfort. One clerk is rolling his shoulder in slow circles. Another has removed his boots entirely and is flexing his toes, like that will help his knuckles. Still, the work must go on. And it's not just letters and logs. It's the repetition, the exactness required. You can't just summarize. You must replicate. Word for word. Number for number. Line for unending line. There's a story that circulates the office, half joke, half warning, about a clerk who copied the same shipping record so many times that he began to dream in barrel counts. One night, he allegedly walked to the wharf in his sleep and tried to sort crates by moonlight. No one knows if it's true, but no one's laughing either. You try adjusting your grip. Some clerks hold the quill like a spoon, others like a dagger. You go for the gentle claw approach. Fingers curved, pinky trailing slightly, wrist floating just off the desk. It's supposed to prevent cramping. You've read it in a manual. It doesn't help. There's no real cure, just survival techniques. One of the newer clerks has a cushion wrapped around his forearm like a tiny pillow. Rosenthal calls it the dainty brace. Secretly, you envy it. Some use wrist wraps. Others keep pebbles in their pockets to roll between tasks. One ambitious soul tried using both hands, switching every paragraph. It was chaos. His left-handed script looked like a panicked crab trying to write a will. Historians still argue whether copyist injuries affected record-keeping accuracy in the colonies. Some believe it caused clerical errors that shifted trade patterns. Others say the empire simply didn't care, as long as the taxes got collected. But here, in this stifling room with ink-streaked desks and sweat-damp neckcloths, accuracy matters. You care. You take pride in your loops and tails, in your tidy margins, in the cue that looks like it got dressed up for court. You pause to flex your hand again. Shake it gently. Whisper something encouraging to your wrist. It refuses to respond. Still, you dip the quill, press the nib to the paper, and write. Barrel Sumner 56, contents stable. No signs of rot. Arrived with minor odor. You smile. The line is absurdly specific, but it's yours. The ache returns, of course. It always does. But there's a strange intimacy in this pain. It tells you that you've done something today, that the page has been filled, that your ink, however unstable, has left its mark, and perhaps that's enough. It's easy to forget sometimes, especially when your head is spinning from ink fumes and your hand is locked in a cramped claw, that what you're doing is part of a much bigger machine. A slow, grinding, ink-soaked mechanism called colonial bureaucracy, and it is nothing if not relentless. You're reminded of this when the door creaks open mid-afternoon and a courier staggers in, arms full of scrolls, ledgers, and envelopes that have seen things. They're water-stained, sun-bleached, and one smells distinctly of molasses. Without even greeting anyone, he dumps the entire pile on the central desk, and leaves with a groan that could unmoor a canoe. This is your life now, processing the Empire's paperwork, one soggy shipment manifest at a time. You join the others around the pile. It's like unwrapping someone else's overdue homework. Rosenthal sighs. Ah, the monthly export totals from the Eastern Port. Perkins mutters, finally. We can now confirm that rum still exists. You take your stack and retreat to your desk, where the paper practically sighs as you lay it out. Salt rings along the edges, a smudge shaped like a thumbprint, and ink that looks like it tried to escape halfway through a sentence. The original clerk clearly fought the elements and lost. Your task? Translate it, rewrite it, refine it. This is what bureaucrats do. Take the raw noise of commerce, labor, weather, livestock, and confusion, and turn it into something that can be filed, stamped, and eventually forgotten in a wooden cabinet labeled Other. Today's entries include hogs exported, baskets of ginger shipped, several crates of Miskter minerals, and oddly, one package listed as artificial bird. No further clarification is offered. You write each entry slowly, carefully, transposing bad spelling into better spelling, turning splattered words into structured prose. You add punctuation like it's gold. You correct the word spice, where it had clearly once said spite. And as you write, the ink becomes your tool for taming the chaos. A sentence is like a little fence you build around nonsense. A proper date can pin history to the page. A well-formed signature turns ambiguity into law. The process is slow, gentle, and in its own way, soothing. Colonial bureaucracy wasn't built on bold actions or grand speeches. It was built on repetition, on formality, on the same phrases written 100,000 times, received in proper order, as witnessed by the undersigned, to be reviewed upon next dispatch. You've copied those lines so often, they now live in your bones. You once nearly said, received in proper order, when someone handed you a mango at the market. Still, there is comfort in the repetition. It creates rhythm, structure, a sense that you are part of something, even if that something is a slow-moving sea of ink and dust and rotting shipping crates. Historians still argue whether colonial record-keeping actually achieved anything beyond preserving the illusion of control. Some suggest that entire archives were never opened again after being sealed. Others believe the act of writing, of documenting, no matter how redundant, was itself a kind of power. And here you are, a cog in that power. You flip to the next form. A customs ledger, badly water-damaged, with someone's lunch pressed into the corner like a pressed flower. The document lists 38 sacks of rice, 12 bolts of calico, 4 crates of ceremonial masks. The question mark is original. 1 barrel of eels. You don't ask. You just write. This, after all, is what you do. You turn eel crates into crisp script. You log masks, minerals, and mystery birds with equal indifference. And if you make the margins even, the overseer may even nod. There's a whisper of pride there, too, because while governors give orders and captains sail seas, it's your ink that makes it real. You're the final step. The recorder, the one who gives the empire its paperwork soul. And as the sun lowers behind the palm trees, casting stripes across your page and your half-finished notes, you feel a quiet sense of accomplishment. You have, for today, held the bureaucracy together, one blot at a time. Late afternoon has a strange texture in the colonial office. The air becomes syrupy, the light turns gold and sleepy, and conversation drifts into softer, stranger territory. It's during these hours that the more peculiar stories emerge, like today's debate over scented inks and their unexpected side hustle. Romantic correspondence. Yes, romance. In the heart of a bureaucratic swamp of rum ledgers and pig counts, Even colonial clerks occasionally had a flutter of the heart, and naturally, they responded with ink. It starts when Rosenthal, while rummaging through a drawer, uncovers an old letter folded with care and sealed in faded lilac wax. He cracks the seal, sniffs. Lavender, he announces with mild disbelief. Possibly rose. Or soap. Perkins snorts. Scented ink. Figures. That was a fad 10 years ago. Got all the younger clerks trying to impress bookkeepers and landladies. You raise your eyebrows. They perfumed their ink. Oh yes, Rosenthal says, already rereading the letter like a scandalous novel. Supposedly it added character, a whisper of intent. You try to imagine it, hunched at your desk, quill in hand, carefully dripping rose water into your ink pot, hoping it doesn't curdle the gall solution. A risk worth taking for love, apparently. The practice, as you learn, was widespread, especially in better-connected offices, where imported oils and dried petals could be slipped into writing supplies. Lavender was the classic. Rose was daring. Citrus was for the bold. And sandalwood? Well, that was a power move. Some clerks even maintained 2 sets of ink, one for official correspondence and one for their private writings, usually sealed in wax with elaborate, overly dramatic monograms. These letters were slipped into outgoing crates, tucked inside books, or handed off to trusted couriers with too much discretion and not enough curiosity. Historians still argue whether scented ink had any meaningful cultural weight or was just a passing affectation for bored men with too much access to cloves and not enough emotional vocabulary. But in these pages, there is a kind of charm. The handwriting tends to be loopier, more expressive. Lines trail off wistfully. Some letters include poems, others, terrible puns. One, allegedly, was written entirely in lemon juice, a secret message revealed only when held over a candle. That one burned a hole in the recipient's desk. You once heard about a clerk who used cinnamon oil in his ink, wrote a letter to a merchant's daughter. The ink smelled so strongly it attracted ants during transit. The letter arrived half-eaten. The romance did not survive. Still, the trend persisted. Perkins, despite his protests, admits he once received a letter written in violet ink. Couldn't read a word of it, he mutters. But it smelled nice. That counts for something. You begin to wonder if you've ever received scented ink. Your mail has always smelled vaguely of mildew and ship tar, not exactly the perfume of passion, but the idea is appealing. You imagine writing with clove-scented ink. A simple thinking of you note to someone back home, or maybe just to your future self, tucked into a journal for years down the line. A small, fragrant time capsule. You decide to experiment. You retrieve a tiny vial of dried herbs from your drawer, part of an abandoned spice shipment you helped log months ago, and sprinkle just a pinch into your newest ink bottle. It fizzes faintly. The ink turns a shade more red than black. You stir. Dip your quill. Test a line. Dear unknown reader, should this ever reach your nose? Congratulations. The scent is faint, not floral, something between mint and old wood. You smile. It's imperfect, but personal. It's easy to forget, amid the lists and ledgers, that ink is not just about information. It's about presence, proof that someone was here, felt something, wanted to preserve it, and sometimes that something smells faintly of time. Outside, the sun leans lazily against the horizon. Inside, the office is quieter than usual. Even the parrots seem subdued. You fold your scented page, seal it with leftover wax, place it carefully in the back of your drawer. Not everything has to be filed. Some things are meant to linger, like lavender on parchment, like old feelings, like a ghost in ink. You never expected to end up caring so deeply about the origin of your ink, and yet here you are, listening with rapt attention as Perkins recounts his time apprenticing with an ink maker in London. Apparently, Before he became the stoic godfather of colonial ledgers, he spent 2 years in a dim, brick-walled workshop, stirring bubbling vats of black liquid and inhaling enough vinegar fumes to pickle his thoughts. "You haven't lived," he says, leaning back in his chair, "until you've spent 3 hours straining fermented oak sludge through sheep's wool." Rosenthal makes a face. "I think I have, actually, happily, but Perkins isn't done." He goes on to describe the Guild of Stationers and Ink Makers, a loosely organized but fiercely proud group of artisans who ruled the black arts of ink production with inky fists. These were men and women who knew their tannins from their sulfates, who carried stained aprons like badges of honor, who argued, passionately, sleep-deprived, about gum ratios and gall fermentation times. You picture it, a candlelit room, floor sticky with spillage, apprentices murmuring oaths in Latin while measuring out powdered rust like it's gold dust, quills hanging like drying herbs, scrolls stacked high with fading recipes passed down for generations. Some of them swore by iron sulfate harvested from only one Welsh mine. Others used rainwater caught from cathedral roofs. One legend told of a master ink maker who aged his mixture in wine casks and claimed the results were good enough for kings, dangerous enough for poets. Historians still argue whether these ink guilds were practical production centers or early temples of bureaucratic mysticism. Certainly, their techniques had flair. One 18th century formula called for 3 pinches of salt, 2 prayers to St. Jerome, and a feather stolen from a wise goose. Naturally, some recipes were guarded like state secrets. Apprentices signed contracts. Visitors were watched. Some say one ink master faked his own death to prevent his formula from being stolen by a rival working for the French. The connection between those candlelit shops and your own damp office is direct and undeniable. Every bottle of iron gall ink that makes its way to the colonies has passed through some echo of that old world, crafted with care, argued over in pubs, bottled in small batches and sealed with wax that smells faintly of regret. You've come to appreciate the work behind the bottle, the fact that someone, somewhere, boiled, stirred, and strained just so you could cross a T cleanly on page 7 of a boring inventory. And then, of course, there are the labels. Colonial clerks like yourself become connoisseurs of packaging. You can tell a batch's quality by the font on the cork seal. The best ones come in squat little ceramic pots with handwritten tags. The worst come in reused vinegar jugs with the word inky scrawled in coal pencil. Those ones are never good. Sometimes they're just prune water. Perkins brings out an old bottle from his drawer, a relic, dust-covered and heavy. "This," he says reverently, "is Master Hensley's Black, London, 1762. He opens it. The scent is sharp and elegant. You swear the room darkens slightly. You wouldn't be surprised if it still writes after 60 years. Rosenthal, not to be outdone, reveals a small glass vial filled with purple ink that glows faintly in candlelight. Dutch, 1775. Smells like cloves and betrayal. You realize there's a kind of collector's culture among clerks. The ink aficionado, the pigment snob, the colonial archivist who buys bootleg batches from traveling monks. One man allegedly used squid-based ink from a Portuguese pirate scribe and claimed it made his handwriting more aggressive. You look at your own humble bottle, pale black, slightly crusted at the lip, and feel a mix of pride and longing. Yours may not come from a famed London guild, but it's yours. Mixed here. Tested. Adjusted. Failed. Recovered. The signature at the bottom of your last report may not glow, but it dried well and didn't smudge, and that counts for something. And maybe, in some quiet archive room centuries from now, a historian will examine your line work, squint at the faded loops of your letters, inhale the faint, Vinegar ghost scent left behind by your humble ink. And maybe, just maybe, they'll whisper, "This clerk knew what he was doing." Today's experiment is optimistic. You've decided to try something unconventional, spurred on by Rosenthal's latest theory and a strange dream involving coconuts and quills. The idea? Coconut-based ink. He read about it in an old Dutch merchant's journal, something about boiled husk fiber and fermented water. You're skeptical, but also bored. So, you begin. Step 1. Secure a coconut. Not as easy as it sounds when you're stuck in an office where the most exotic item on hand is a lemon that's been used as a paperweight for 3 weeks. Fortunately, a young courier passing by agrees to retrieve one in exchange for a note of recommendation and half a stale biscuit. The coconut arrives an hour later, still slightly green and suspiciously hairy. You and Rosenthal set to work. You scrape the husk, boil it down with water, and because you're feeling bold, a dash of vinegar. The result is brown, murky, smells like wet rope and unfulfilled dreams. It does not look promising. But you're committed now. You strain it, let it cool, and pour it into a tiny ink bottle labeled optimistically as Tropical No. 1. Rosenthal insists on testing it first. He writes one word. Success? It blots immediately. Spreads like gossip. The paper sags from the moisture. You stare at it for a moment before bursting out laughing, a sound so rare in the office that Perkins looks up in alarm. "New ink?" he asks. You hold up the bottle like a prize pig. "Coconut." Perkins winces as though you've insulted his ancestors. Ink should not smell like a beach accident. He's not wrong. Still, you give it a fair try. You dilute the mix. Add a drop of iron sulfate. It changes color slightly. Now, a pale sludge gray with a greenish tint. You write a line. Inventory of barrels, 3rd shipment. Halfway through the word shipment, the ink clogs your quill. You clean it. Try again. This time the ink separates on the page into little oil puddles. You sigh. Rosenthal, trying to remain supportive, offers, "At least it's biodegradable?" You abandon the experiment and switch back to a reliable gall blend. The coconut bottle is relegated to the back shelf, beside a failed attempt at beetroot ink and a jar simply labeled "Why?" But the day isn't a waste. In trying something new, you remember how many inks started this way. With accidents. With failed recipes and silly ideas. Trial, error, repeat. The colonial office may seem dull on the surface, but it's also a laboratory. A quiet hive of curious minds and ruined paper. Historians still argue whether exotic ink recipes in colonial outposts had any lasting value. Some believe they were desperate improvisations. Others think they were the early stirrings of global chemistry, moments when local knowledge met European stubbornness and produced questionable coconut water. You flip through your notebook and add the recipe to the back, under Unreliable Experiments. 1 coconut husk, shredded. 1 cup, water. A splash of vinegar. Heat gently. Regret immediately. You smile. There's something endearing about the failure. Something human. The colonial machine may grind on, but it's fueled by little moments like these. Messy, aromatic, occasionally sticky failures. Later, Rosenthal quietly brings over a slip of paper. It reads, "Scented ink is fine, but tropical ink is where reputations go to die." You pin it to your wall. Outside, the sun has dipped lower, casting shadows that stretch your desk into something dreamlike. You tidy the quills, cap the ink, even the coconut one, though you suspect it might ferment by morning. You lean back. Another strange, ink-stained day in the books, and you wouldn't have it any other way. It starts with a scream. Not a terrified one, more of a frustrated yelp. the kind that only occurs when a bottle of ink topples sideways and dumps its contents directly onto a pile of signed export permits. You look up. The clerk responsible is frozen, eyes wide, watching the black pool slowly bloom across the parchment like an unstoppable fungus. No one moves at first. It's too sacred, too tragic. Like watching a ship sink in slow motion. Perkins finally exhales. Another treaty, murdered. Spilled ink is no small thing in the colonial office. It is catastrophe, comedy, and paperwork apocalypse rolled into one. And this is far from the first time. Ink disasters are part of the job. Every clerk has a story. A moment of carelessness. A rogue elbow. A bottle with a loose cork. A sneezing fit during a signature. There was the time Rosenthal knocked his elbow against the table, launching a full bottle of Indigo No. 6 onto a register of rice tariffs. The resulting stain looked like a squid had exploded. To this day, the document is referred to as the Blue Incident. You recall a far worse tale told in hushed tones, of a clerk who spilled red ink on a shipment order for medicinal powders. The smudged stains resembled blood. When the ship arrived at port, the crates were opened with swords drawn. The clerk was reassigned to boat maintenance. He now writes fishing tallies, in pencil. And then there are the smudged treaties. One was reportedly signed between two merchant houses to settle a boundary dispute. The ink, still damp, was folded prematurely. The signature of one party bled into the date, turning May 17th into what looked like matronly. For weeks, clerks debated whether the document referenced a person or a new port. The goods sat untouched in a warehouse, rotting in dignified silence. Historians still argue whether a particular peace agreement between two spice islands was voided because the final clause became unreadable after a secretary sneezed mid-blot. You, of course, have had your own moments. There was that time you tried to sign a ledger during a thunderstorm, and the window blew open just as you dipped the quill. Wind, paper, ink, chaos. For a full hour, the office looked like someone had tried to make art with an octopus. The problem isn't just spillage, it's permanence. Most inks, especially those based on iron gall, don't come out. Not from shirts, not from wood, and definitely not from official documents. Perkins says that's the point. If ink can be erased, so can history. He says this often, usually while scrubbing ink off his hands using lemon juice and muttered curses. Some clerks have developed rituals to avoid disaster. One always anchors his bottle in a box of sand. Another wears a wrist strap made of string to remind the hand to be humble. You just try not to breathe too hard near the edge of the desk. Then there's blotting paper, the supposed savior. In theory, you press it gently against your writing to lift excess ink. In practice, you either forget to use it, or press too hard and remove everything. Or worse, create a ghost print of your letter across the next page. One poor soul, trying to blot an official pardon, managed to smudge the names so badly, the governor reread it as, "Pardon, no one." It took 3 weeks to undo that little misunderstanding. You develop your own philosophy. Ink is like time. Once spilled, it cannot be undone. Only annotated. And so you learn to adapt. You leave wider margins now to give yourself spill space. You open ink bottles slowly, carefully, like disarming explosives. You write with 2 fingers, always lightly curled around the base of the bottle, ready to catch it should it leap. You also, quietly, begin sketching the more impressive ink disasters in the back of your chaos notebook. There's ink sunburst, gall drip avalanche, and Rosenthal's midnight bloom. One day, you plan to bind them into a tiny field guide, the natural history of accidental inks, because in the end, these spills and smears are part of the world you occupy. The colonial office is not sterile. It is a living, breathing thing. And sometimes, it sneezes ink all over your final draft. But that's fine. You can always write it again. Better. Slower. With sand ready and wax nearby. You'll keep the memory of the mess tucked behind your more official loops and lines. And perhaps someday, someone will find the smudged treaty, the blue-stained rice ledger, or the red-speckled trade agreement, and wonder, what happened here? And they'll know. A clerk had a moment. Late evening in the office has a certain softness to it. The air, finally cooling after a long, humid day, carries the faint scent of old wood, melted wax, and the last sighs of expended ink. Rosenthal has lit a single candle by the window. It flickers gently as you finish up a customs report that no one will likely read. But tonight, the office hums with a quiet energy, because it's time for the most delicate matter of all: ink color codes. Most people assume all ink is equal. After all, it's just writing. Words on paper. Black and white. Simple, but not in here. In this realm of bureaucrats and colonial minutiae, ink isn't just about legibility. It's about status, secrecy, and the finely tuned visual language of power. And you've learned the hard way that certain ink colors carry unspoken rules, rules no one writes down, but everyone enforces with sidelong glances and passive-aggressive comments in the margins. Black, of course, is king. It's the default, the expected. Use black ink, and you're safe. Boring, perhaps, but safe. It says, "I'm following protocol," and "no surprises here." Black is the ink of inventory, tax records, shipping logs. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of white bread. But there's nuance within black. Rosenthal uses a blue-black that he insists gives serious but soulful energy. Perkins, as always, prefers a dark iron gall with a brown undertone he calls judicial dusk. Yours tends to shift slightly, depending on the humidity and your mood, what the others call scribbler's gray. Then there's red. Red ink is sacred and dangerous, traditionally used only by senior clerks for corrections, warnings, and ceremonial notices. Red ink on a page means someone's in trouble, or someone's dead. Or, in one famous case, both. You've seen a clerk nearly faint after accidentally using red ink to sign his name on a coffee ledger. "Are you implying the beans are cursed?" Rosenthal teased. The man transferred to another department the next day. And green ink? That one's murky. Some offices reserve it for financial notes, bank columns, tariffs, balance discrepancies. Others view it as outright frivolous, fit only for marginalia and garden inventories. One overly confident junior clerk once used green ink to list rum barrels. The overseer quietly crossed it out and wrote, "Try again," in grown-up ink. Historians still argue whether these color traditions emerged organically or were secretly enforced by board managers desperate for meaning. But there's no denying that each hue carries weight. Blue is associated with elegance, sometimes even flattery. Love letters. Letters to faraway cousins. Borderline indulgent reports about crop yields that pleased the eye and the spirit. Purple? That's tricky. Exotic. Associated with nobility but also vanity. Rosenthal tried it once. For correspondence with a librarian, he explained. Very intelligent woman. The ink bled. The letter was never sent. And then there's gold ink. Real gold. Rare. Impractical. Often more of a myth than a real option. Allegedly used for royal edicts and ceremonial charters. One clerk claimed he saw a golden signature once, on a treaty between two spice lords. "It shimmered," he whispered, "like money pretending to be a word. You've never used gold. You probably never will. But just knowing it exists adds a shimmer to your otherwise monochrome world. Tonight, you're copying final numbers onto a trade agreement. You pause for a moment, quill hovering above the page. Black feels too heavy. Blue is too soft. So you reach for a rare bottle of dark green you've been saving for months. Not bright. Just enough of a tint to say, this mattered. Not officially, but personally. The ink flows beautifully. It has the texture of silk and the scent of pine and vinegar. The words appear cleaner, calmer, as if the color itself is helping you think. You imagine the recipient seeing the green and wondering, why this shade? Was it intentional? Is this standard now? You smile. The real answer is, it just felt right. Because in the world of ink, sometimes a color is more than a choice. It's a whisper, a signal, a small rebellion wrapped in a polite document. You finish the page. Blot it gently. Let it dry. And as you cap the bottle and pack away your tools for the night, you feel a quiet satisfaction, not just for the work done, but for the subtle language you've joined. The secret order of those who know that ink isn't just a medium, it's a mood. You never thought you'd hoard ink, and yet here you are, carefully tucking away a small bottle of Iron Gall No. 5 behind a stack of dusty parchment rolls, like a squirrel preparing for bureaucratic winter. Not because you're greedy, not because you want to feel the thrill of minor office smuggling, but because there's a storm coming. And when storms come, paper shortages and ink panic aren't far behind. It begins subtly. The breeze from the port starts carrying the scent of wet rope and unshipped crates. Couriers mention rough waves and ships rerouted. The latest shipment from Lisbon is 3 days late, then 4. Then the office secretary posts a notice. Ink conservation is advised until further supply. That's when the panic sets in. You've seen it before. It starts with nervous glances at dwindling ink levels. Then clerks begin diluting batches with rainwater, or, in Rosenthal's case, tea. The resulting hue was described as haunted amber. Next comes the rationing. You're told to combine entries when possible and minimize decorative flourishes. A death knell for your elegant ampersands. Perkins goes into a quiet rage. Efficiency? In my cursive, even blotting sand becomes scarce. You start reusing pages, blotting your current page with the previous page. It's a slippery slope. Some clerks resort to blowing on their ink like panicked birthday guests. Others fan documents using shipping manifests from 1732. Then someone mutters the word ink hoarder. Everyone looks around. Suspicion thickens. You try to keep a low profile. You don't flaunt your backup bottle. You certainly don't mention the secret stash you've tucked under the floorboard behind your chair. A small box containing 3 quills, a sliver of sealing wax, and half a bottle of your finest blend. It's not selfishness, it's survival. Paper, too, becomes scarce. The high-quality sheets vanish first, like nobles fleeing a scandal. You're left with thick, fibrous sheets that absorb ink like a sponge and smear if you so much as look at them too quickly. One page tears mid-signature. You tape it back together with wax and quiet tears. Rosenthal suggests switching to alternate materials. He tests a piece of palm bark, writes, "Dear Sir" on it. The quill splinters. He abandons the experiment and just starts writing smaller. You hear whispers of a clerk in the northern office using banana leaves. Another, in the southern outpost, began writing on the backs of trade maps, flipping over sketches of river bends to squeeze in tax records. Desperate times. Historians still argue whether colonial supply shortages genuinely disrupted administration or simply forced clerks to become more inventive. Some believe that hoarding ink and paper led to the rise of shorthand styles unique to each colony. Early bureaucratic dialects, if you will. Perkins certainly has his own. He now uses 3 dashes to mean shipment delayed, and an odd little squiggle that, according to legend, translates to rum missing, suspected bribery. It's practically a secret language. You've begun decoding it in your spare moments, just in case. Meanwhile, morale dips. Ink stains become badges of battle. Quill nibs are honed to nothing. used until they snap mid-sentence. You've started soaking your old nibs in vinegar overnight, hoping to wring one more day from each. Every page matters now. Every letter must count. You revise twice, sometimes 3 times, just to make sure you're not wasting space. Your handwriting shrinks, your loops tighten, your metaphors disappear entirely. It's not just bureaucracy anymore. It's bureaucratic survivalism. And then, just when you think you can't ration another syllable, a miracle arrives. A courier. Late, rain-soaked, dragging a crate behind him like a dog that bit back. Inside, bundles of parchment, new ink bottles, fresh wax, sacks of blotting sand, quills. The office erupts in a kind of hushed joy. No one cheers. That would be improper. But you see Rosenthal polish his spectacles with real optimism. Perkins mutters, "Blessed relief," and quietly reintroduces decorative swashes into his P's. You return to your desk and pull out a fresh sheet. A real one. Smooth, lightly cream-colored, the kind that whispers when touched. You dip your quill into your best ink, not the hoarded stuff, but the good communal batch just opened. And write. Report resumed, conditions stabilized, ink and sanity restored. For now. You pause, smile, blot gently, fold with pride. Storms pass, but ink endures. By the time the storm has fully cleared, both the literal one outside and the metaphorical one inside the ink cabinet, you begin to notice something else changing. The tools. Slowly, subtly, the whisper of progress is crawling into the office. It begins innocently enough. One day, a customs inspector arrives with a strange device under his arm, rectangular, heavy, clunky. "It's a typewriter," he says proudly, as though revealing a pet dragon. Writes perfectly. Uniform. Clean. You all gather around it, clerks with ink-stained fingers staring down at a machine that claims to replace everything you know. He gives a demonstration. Metal arms slap inked letters onto the page with mechanical precision. No blotting needed. No smudges. No wrist pain. Just a dry, unfeeling tick, tick, tick. You're horrified. It's too loud. Too cold. Too final. Where's the nuance? Where's the graceful arc of a quill? The rhythm of sand shaking across the page? The quiet satisfaction of a well-dried signature? Where's the smell? Rosenthal leans in and whispers, "It sounds like a hungry beetle eating someone's journal." Perkins says nothing, just glares at the machine like it owes him money. Still, management is intrigued. They bring in more of the devices over time. One clerk, young, new, unburdened by ink nostalgia, embraces it fully. He types faster than anyone can write. His reports are clean, uniform, and terrifyingly legible. But there's no soul in it. You try it once, just a paragraph. Your hands stumble on the keys. The spacing feels awkward. The letters too sharp, too loud. When the page rolls out, you stare at it and feel nothing. No pride. No trace of your presence. Just sterile lines. Back at your desk, you return to your ink. The quill. The familiar scrape and flow. You smile as your G loops too low, and your S leans lazily against the line. Imperfect. But yours. Still, change is coming. Soon after, carbon paper arrives. Thin sheets that let you copy text by pressing through layers. Revolutionary, they say. Now you can make duplicates without rewriting. The clerks mutter. Now everyone can make a mess twice as fast, Rosenthal complains. And then, the fountain pen. Sleek. Refillable. It eliminates the need to dip. Some love it. Others distrust it. You test one cautiously. It writes well, sure. But the ink? Too clean. Too tidy. You miss the occasional blot, the slight inconsistencies that say, A real person touched this. Historians still argue whether the arrival of mechanized writing tools in colonial offices improved productivity or simply erased the art from administration. There's merit to both sides. Yes, forms are cleaner, ledgers more legible, but the human touch fades. You notice it already. The newer clerks no longer talk about ink recipes. They don't sniff their bottles or discuss gall ratios. They don't argue over the emotional weight of blue versus black. They just load cartridges and go. Perkins calls them ghost writers, not because they write for others, but because no one will remember them. And maybe he's right. There's something irreplaceable about your ink-stained fingers, your weathered notebook, the scratch of your quill against a good piece of parchment. It's a record not just of what was said, but how it was said. The pauses, the pressure, the personal. Tonight you stay late, not out of duty, but out of defiance. You write a letter by candlelight, dipping your quill in that old bottle of deep brown ink. Each word forms slowly, gracefully. You let the lines breathe. You sprinkle sand, fold it carefully, seal it with wax. No copies, no carbon sheet, just one letter. Real, tangible. Before you file it, you whisper, "I was here," because soon the typewriters will take over. The ink will dry up. The chaos notebooks will vanish, and no one will remember what it felt like to leave behind a piece of yourself in every looping and blot and flourish. But tonight you do, and that's enough. Evening settles on the office like a soft wool blanket. Outside, the insects chirp sleepily. A breeze carries the smell of charcoal fires and distant mango trees. Inside, you sit alone at your desk, ink drying slowly on your final entry of the day. The others have gone home. The typewriters are quiet. The candles burn low. You open your drawer and pull out your chaos notebook, not for work, but for memory. Tonight, you flip back through the pages slowly, reverently. Each line tells a story. Crooked entries from your first days, dramatic ink blots from the storm week, half-sketched flamingos in hats. Here, you find a test page, where your handwriting slanted to the left for an entire week. Was that when you were trying to fix your posture? Here, a recipe scribbled during a feverish hour. Ink, but with cloves and hope. And there, on the back of one yellowed page, a line written in faded green. Ink remembers what we forget. You don't even recall writing it. But you know it's true. This job, for all its dust and drudgery, has left you with something strange and beautiful, a trail of ink across time. You've learned to read people by their handwriting. You've tasted the difference between good gall and bad. You can tell the day's humidity by how your letters curl. You've argued over punctuation. You've invented 5 different ways to describe slightly spoiled rum. You've folded pages with surgical precision, signed your name in 3 official styles, and kept your favorite quill long after its nib went crooked. And you've left behind hundreds, thousands of pages that someone, someday, might stumble across. Maybe they'll read your reports, your lists, your receipts. Maybe they'll see the thumbprint in the corner, the faded scent of lavender on the page, and wonder who you were. They'll never know your face, but they'll see your hand. Historians still argue whether clerks were true agents of empire or merely functionaries lost in the ink. Some say you were a tool, others a chronicler. But you know the truth. You were a quiet witness, a slow writer in a fast world, a guardian of forgotten details. You close the notebook and place it back in your drawer, beside the good ink and the candle stub. You stretch your fingers one last time, not with the pain of work, but with the ease of having finished something that mattered, however small, however strange. Tomorrow, the desk will still be here. The quill, the sand, the ghosts of smudged letters and spilled treaties. The machine across the room will clatter again. The newer clerks will laugh at their carbon copies. But you'll dip your pen, You'll write your line, and the ink will carry your quiet defiance into another day. And now, as the candlelight fades and the paper cools beneath your resting hand, you let the stillness settle around you. The world of ink and parchment, of dusty shelves, and murmured complaints about quill angles. It recedes, softly, gently. You're no longer hunched at the desk, no longer worrying about margins, or blotting too soon, or whether a shipment of sugar was ever signed for. You're just here, breathing slowly, listening to the creak of the wooden chair and the faint rustle of palm fronds through the shuttered window. The ink, still drying on the page, no longer demands your attention. It's finished. The day's words are tucked safely into the world now. You've done your part. That's enough. Let the repetition fade. Let your thoughts drift, like old quill shavings carried off by a breeze. Each little routine, each precise loop and quiet decision dissolves into comfort, into the rhythm of a day well spent. You are still, quiet, whole. The desk will wait for you, but for now, rest. Let the pages close. Let the ink sleep. Let yourself go.